Now, of all the characters in the sequel trilogy, many people will say that Kylo Ren was the best of the bunch, or had the best arc, which I will agree with. Though at the same time, many people will also say he didn't have a whole lot of competition in that department, that none of the other characters were really handled all that well, which brings us to my series here called Saving the Sequels, where the goal is to try and, more or less, keep the gist or general story of the first two movies of the trilogy intact, but to make some changes here and there in order to hopefully make things a little better and a bit more cohesive, especially in terms of the characters. And yes, I know hindsight is 2020, and it's almost always easier to go back and fix someone else's mistakes or mess than it is to create your own original thing, which is part of the reason why when we get to it, I'll just be coming up with a whole new idea or story for episode 9. That and all the changes made in the first two movies in the trilogy will just call for a whole new and different ending, because I'm really taking the story in a whole other direction. Anyway, though this is now the fourth part of the series, you don't necessarily need to have seen the other three or to watch them first, though if you do want to check them out after, I'll include links in the description below. In fact, many of you have asked if I could just go through the movies and lay out the changes that way, which is a great idea and what I'm going to do starting with the next video. But before then, I do want to talk specifically about Kylo Ren a little bit and what went wrong, even though, as I said at the top, he did have the best story overall, and there are certainly a lot of people who love it as is and love the character, which is fine. I do again think there's a decent story there for the most part, and I get why some people do think it was good. And personally, I think the original idea they had for him, where he was presented as this sort of Darth Vader wannabe in The Force Awakens, is a bit of a double-edged sword, you could say. Because yes, at face value, the idea that a grandchild of Anakin Skywalker, or Vader, would want to be like him, the Vader part of him, immediately sounds intriguing and grabs your attention. And yes, in the context of the story, someone wanting to be just like Vader, especially his grandson, could work extremely well if handled right. However, if not handled right, that wannabe part is going to spill off the screen and right out of the story, and your audience is going to end up feeling like they're just being presented with a Vader wannabe character, no more, no less. And that's the tricky or double-edged part when you go down such a path, when you openly compare or make a new villain just like Vader. Because there is only one Darth Vader, and most characters, except for an extremely well-crafted and used one, is going to fall well short of that mark. And so that's the hard part with Kylo Ren, and or any villain in Star Wars really, which is, for better or worse, they're immediately walking in the shadows of giants. They're going to be compared to characters like Vader and Palpatine, even if you don't make them like that. But if you do try to mimic that, well, you're going to end up with problems again if you don't do it right. And what's either crazy, bold, or just plain stupid about The Force Awakens, you can pick which one it is we're even presented with the very same sort of hierarchy or relationship for our villains as the previous trilogy or the original trilogy. We have Kylo Ren, our Vader wannabe, under the command and tutelage of a shadowy, even more powerful figure, which is of course Snoke. In other words, we have the Vader-Palpatine relationship all over again, right down to them even presiding over virtually the same type of empire as before, and they're even having to deal with a rebellion or resistance, and hunting down the last of the Jedi as they do. Even still, even though this is just a copy and paste, maybe the crazy part is, there was really a chance for something here to work. I thought things started off really well for Kylo Ren, and when I say start, I'm talking about going way back to that first full trailer, and we didn't even know Kylo was Ben Solo at that point, and we see him talking to the melted helmet of Darth Vader, and he says, "Nothing will stand in our way, I will finish what you started." Because not only do I feel like those were some of the best lines in the whole trilogy, and that it was the most haunting moment of the trilogy, and the only time I think I got chills from this trilogy, but unfortunately it was only in the trailer. That scene wasn't as good in the actual movie, and I'll get to that in a second. Anyway, him saying all that in the trailer immediately did two very, very important things. It did something that tends to lead to fantastic villains sometimes, which is, it gave him purpose, and it gave him resolve. And it did it in a way that tied back into everything that had happened before in the story or the previous two trilogies. I mean, Thanos, for example, is a great villain not just because he can go toe-to-toe and defeat any of our heroes, but because he has a purpose he believes in, and he even believes it to be a righteous one. Furthermore, he has unwavering resolve. No one and nothing will stand in his way. And he even sees that resolve as a type of burden he alone can carry. He feels like he's the only one in the galaxy that can and will do what must be done to save it. And with a couple simple lines in a trailer as well as a melted helmet, a very similar foundation had been laid with Kylo Ren, but they did absolutely nothing with it. In fact, Rian Johnson in The Last Jedi even went the opposite direction with the character. However, even in The Force Awakens, they undermine the possibilities with him. They show cracks in his resolve when he talks about feeling the pull to the light. And it happens in the very same scene he talks about how nothing will stand in his way, if he can just be showing the power of the dark side again, as he says. And look, don't get me wrong, for the way his story went and how everything turned out for Kylo or Ben in it, that scene is actually fine as is and it fits. He's a conflicted, frustrated character who at one point in The Last Jedi thinks he finally knows what he wants, thinks he wants to be free to make his own way, to do his own thing, then kind of goes back to wanting to be like Vader again in The Rise of Skywalker because reasons. Then in the end, he just wants to be a good guy, and he gives his life to save Rey. But anyway here, imagine if in A New Hope we'd already seen cracks in Darth Vader's resolve, if even then little subtle hints had been dropped that he'd eventually come back to the light, or if he could feel the pull to it and told us about it. That probably would have ruined the character from the word go, because part of what makes him a terrifying villain is you don't believe there is an ounce of good in him. We even basically hear Obi-Wan and Yoda say as much. Yet deep down, there is compassion in him. That good person he once was still existed, and it took Luke at the very end to be able to bring it back out of him. And so what Kylo Ren comes off feeling like is indeed just entirely a Vader wannabe. He's all conflict and no resolve, which, as I said, and for what it's worth, works for what they did with him or what they had to do with him, since J.J. Abrams right away in The Force Awakens set him up to be that way. I mean, he literally says, "I'm torn apart" right in the movie, though after he says that, he does kill his father Han Solo, so we think he's finally found that resolve. But then he goes on and loses to Rey, so what does it matter if, fully resolved to be on the dark side, he still loses to our hero the first time she picks up a lightsaber? In other words, yeah, he could have still been saved at the end of The Force Awakens, but losing to Rey pretty much spoils everything. Anyway, what if we went the opposite route with Kylo Ren? What if we showed him to have even more resolve and control than Darth Vader himself had once had? What if in that scene where an officer has to tell Kylo that Finn got away along with the droid and Rey, when we're all expecting him to pull a Darth Vader and just kill the officer, that instead of throwing his little temper tantrum, he does nothing. He just remains perfectly calm. What if the terrifying part about Kylo Ren is that he has complete control of all his anger and hate? And I don't mean that he stops himself from experiencing it, but rather that he's learned how to harness it and to be powerful because of it. That instead of getting a character that is being torn apart and is unsure, we get one that has complete and unwavering resolve, that no matter what, he is going to finish what his grandfather started, whatever that may be, which we will learn about and will be part of the story, and will tie into the reason why Luke went away and all that, which I talked a little bit about in another video in this series. Because one of my biggest problems with Kylo's or Ben's story overall is it really is just Anakin's story all over again. He starts out as a Jedi, he falls to the dark side because he's manipulated by Palpatine, but then comes back and gives his life for someone he cares about. And though, yeah, we do want him to be similar to Vader in some respects, we want him to try and carry on his legacy after all and to finish something he started, but we don't want almost the exact same story all over again. We want some sort of different motive behind Kylo's fall, and learning what that is and how it ties into everything will be one of the keys of the whole story. Though, and that said, one way I do want him to be more like the Anakin side of his grandfather, again, I do want there to be similarities between the characters, is that I want him to sort of have respect for those who serve loyally under him, those who, though maybe don't entirely share his vision, at least share his resolve and just believe in him so much that they're willing to do what must be done under him. And part of the way this will be accomplished, and I talked about this a bit in the video that kicked off this series about Finn, is I want him to not only be an elite marksman, to be the best of the best when it comes to troopers, not just played off as some type of janitor for jokes, but to be a member of Kylo Ren's own personal elite squad of troopers, but not only that, but to be the commander of it. This will then sort of make Finn Kylo's Captain Rex, if you will, and give these two a very unique, personal, and dynamic relationship, one that will be needed, especially when we consider again that the whole idea behind this was to sort of make Finn the main hero of the story. And if we're going to do that, we need to connect him to Kylo Ren in a big way. Though this might make you ask, what's the point of the Knights of Ren or a character like Phasma? But we'll get to all that eventually. Their places and everything will be told as well. Anyway then, the only time we'll see any sort of crack in Kylo's calm and seemingly pure evil ways in the first film of the trilogy will come at the end and right before he confronts Finn. Now, right now, as is, there's what I think is a really good moment where Kylo screams traitor at Finn, and it feels like it has all this pain and emotion behind it. It sounds and feels really great, to be honest, till you're like, why is he so upset that a random stormtrooper went AWOL? He himself has spent half the movie telling us how torn apart he himself is. And so yeah, we'll certainly keep that, and it'll play differently now. It'll have meaning, and again be the only moment we see any sort of emotion out of Kylo. We'll know that loyalty is important to him, and any who break from his cause do indeed wound him deeply, and this is something that will very much come into play later on between him and Rey. But for now, well, that's all I've got for you this time. And now it's your turn to tell me what you think about Kylo Ren. Do you like his story in the sequels? Do you like the way he was portrayed as conflicted? Do you think what I'm sort of outlining here is good or bad? Whatever the case may be, leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.